Sam Bankman-Fried was just sentenced and he got 25 years.
Because they're saying he's a 32-year-old man, he's gonna leave at prison at 57. That's not the way the system works at all.
What do you think his frame of mind was? When I went into sentencing and I got 26 years and 4 months, and it was so overwhelmingly devastating. So we've had multiple discussions about Sam Bankman-Fried. I always kind of said like, it's going to be around 20 to 30 years or 25 years, roughly that amount. And then I know you and I had talked about it before. I talked to a lawyer and stuff. I know you and I had talked. And I was saying too, this is what's funny. I was saying the whole time that his co-defendants were probably going to get like 5 years. But you were saying, you actually said you kind of like looked at the guidelines and did a whole thing. And you were saying he's going to get 140 years or something, or that's what it says on the guidelines. But then you were like, but he'll probably get whatever, 20, 25 years. And then he was just sentenced and he got 25 years. So I had a bunch of people in the comment section saying like, bro, you were right. Because I think was it Zach? I don't forget what Zach said. I talked to somebody else and they were saying he was going to get like 100 years or was it 10 years? It was way off. Like I was like, no way. He was like, oh yeah, absolutely. I was like, no, these guys, he'll get 20, 25 years, 30 years maybe in that. So what should he have get, or what did his PSI say? Because you've read some stuff on it, right?
The pre-sentence report suggested 110 years.
Okay.
The government had taken the position of 40 to 50 years. And obviously the defense lowballed that came in saying, hey, there's very low actual loss. Now that they've recovered all the money to pay back all the investors, they're saying 5.5 to 6 years. And so yesterday was his sentencing, and the judge gave him a fairly good break.
Right.
25 is a little bit more than I expected. I actually expected 20 years. Only because, well, obviously the guy's got no prior record. There's no violence in his case. The losses, although egregious, were ameliorated by the fact that they recovered bulk of the money. And like the one finding that the court actually made was that he had gambled with people's lives and money, and that he was not remorseful for committing crimes, but regretful that, quote, he had made a very bad bet about the likelihood of getting caught.
Right.
And so on the basis of that premise, the court said, look, this guy poses a significant risk because he's able to rationalize that he didn't do nothing wrong. And upon getting released, there's a very good chance that he's going to be able to induce other people to put up a significant amount of capital, and he may end up doing it again.
Start the whole process again.
And so for the purposes of making the impact, give him, it was a significant number. 25 years is not a slap on the wrist at all.
Right.
Now, of course, it's not as impactful as the media are characterizing it, because they're saying he's a 32-year-old man, he's going to leave at prison at 57. That's not the way the system works at all.
Right.
And so he's got a 25-year sentence. He'll do 22 on 25. Prior to the First Step Act, you're going to get 1 year of halfway house with the 25-year sentence, so he'll be doing 21. However, now, because of the new credit regime that's in place, every 2 years of prison time gets a year knocked off your sentence. So at 14 years, he will have earned 7 years off. 1 year off his sentence, 6 years extended home confinement or halfway house placement. Well, you can get reductions up to 1/3 of your sentence. So if he's got to serve 22 years, at the 14-year mark, he's transferring to home confinement. So he's going to be home in his mid-40s.
Right.
Which is a dramatically different picture than how it's been characterized.
That's that's going to be just enough time for him to start another another Forex scam. No,
the thing is, a guy like
that. Crypto scam, sorry. Another crypto scam.
And that, of course, the circumstances could always change. Like an inmate of that high profile, very unlikely to prevail in court.
Right.
And there's certainly not going to be any retroactive guideline amendment changes that could potentially help him, because they're going to hit him for the leader organizer. Obviously the loss amount is just off the charts. And so he's going to have to just keep his nose clean, do the 14 years, go to home confinement. He's still going to be a young enough man where he's going to have, enough lifetime where he can.
It's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the. He's not in a Hopper situation where he's going to be getting out at 76.
Yeah.
Assuming he wins, getting out, as a broke down and older individual.
Right. Whereas
Bankman-Fried is he's got plenty of life ahead of him.
Right. I'm sure he doesn't feel that way right now.
No, but the thing is, once he gets to the prison, you've told stories about
Yeah.
it before. You fall into a little bit of a program.
Yeah.
And, the thing about the BOP that I'm sure they would not acknowledge is that they go out of their way to make sure that individuals like that don't have a hard time. I was the captain's orderly at the Medium at Lompoc when another Silicon Valley guy showed up, worth tens of millions of dollars. He was Steve Jobs' neighbor, and double doctorate from Caltech, legendary in the manufacturing computer chip space. And so a couple of days before he gets arrived, I get called up to the captain's office. He says, Rossini, go talk to the operations lieutenant. So I go talk to the ops lieutenant, and he takes me out in the hallway. He doesn't even want the other staff to hear it.
Right.
He's like, look, we got a guy coming off the bus in a couple of days. I want you to go talk to all the reps. Let them know that if anybody in their car fucks with this man, I will smash the entire car. I'll send every one of them to the East Coast. And so I literally spent that day and the following day going around to each of the reps, explaining, hey, look, this is what the captain said.
Right.
This is what the lieutenant said. And so everyone was like, man, who is this guy? Obviously very well connected politically. The guy had like a U.S. senator's phone number on his approved phone list.
Right.
So if you can pick up a phone and call the senator.
Last thing we want is him getting smashed and it's showing up as an article.
Yes.
In the newspaper.
So
makes us
I'm
look
sure that at whatever prison SBF is going to be showing up at, a few days beforehand, their equivalent of me is going to be getting called into the office and saying, hey, look, go straighten everything out. Make sure my task was get him a good cell, get him a good cellmate, get him situated, find out what kind of job he wants, go get him that job, take him around for the first few days, make sure everybody sees that, hey, this is the guy.
Right.
And Mr. Mosen had no problems whatsoever. And so that's what SBF is going to be getting at, and just for the first few years, because after a couple of years, he's going to get transferred down to a low anyway.
Right. So, but initially he's getting 25 years.
Yes.
So initially he's got to do what? Would you say 21?
You do 22 on 25.
22 on 25. So he's because I got 26, I went to a medium.
Yeah, he's going to a medium.
Okay. Because you have a management variable on you as a result, because after 20 years, doesn't matter what your security level is, after you have to be below 20 years to go to a low.
Yes, or the Bureau can waive the public safety factor,
right?
Which is what they oftentimes do with like law enforcement. So if a crooked cop gets a 30-year sentence, he ends up at the low anyway.
Right. There's a better chance he can get hurt.
Yeah, they waived the public safety factor. Right. They may actually end up doing it with Bankman-Fried simply because he is such a high-profile case.
Right.
But otherwise, whatever institution he ends up at, they're going to be taking steps to make sure that this does not happen with this individual, because the level of scrutiny is just outrageous.
Yeah, I was going to say it, but he didn't, by not admitting he'd done anything wrong, by going on his little tour, his media blitz before trial, like he didn't, all the things that he thought he was going to be able to spin in his favor didn't do him any favors at all when it came down to sentencing. Because the one thing they can't stand is for you to not show remorse, not show that, or not to take responsibility. Like they can't stand that.
Well, the guidelines contemplate that action. And so had he done so, he'd have gotten a little lesser sentence. Right. But he's taken the position that, first of all, he's not guilty.
Right.
And he wants to preserve his claims challenging the conviction. But he's not one of these guys who's saying, I'm guilty, but my sentence was out of line.
Right.
He's saying the conduct itself wasn't criminal.
Right.
And so he's put in an untenable position where he can't come in and concede guilt or remorse at sentencing. And so his expressions at sentencing are inconsistent with somebody who's saying, hey, I'm sorry. Like he's saying, I made mistakes with respect to how I chose to do the investments, but there was no criminal intent. And unfortunately for him, one, the case was very strong. Two, he spent a lot of money on attorneys, but the defense wasn't very well placed together. There's ways to build a defense for a guy like that. It's principally called the mosaic defense. And essentially they were taking the defense that, mob lawyers take, poking holes at the credibility of the witnesses. Well, these are witnesses with no prior criminal activity, his ex-girlfriend, right, his other business partners. Like these aren't someone who's got a heavy incentive to lie in order to curry favor because of exposure over his criminal history. And so a woman like that, she's coming in saying, look, I did this. Well, she doesn't have any operational authority. Like, why does she do this? Or why did the computer programmer create this backdoor so that Alameda can go into red and not have it show?
Right.
I mean, he didn't take it upon himself to do that.
Right.
Someone directed him to do it.
Right. Well, and he's the one who's getting on the stand saying,
Oh, they, of course.
This is the guy.
This is the guy who directed it.
Yeah, when you got one person, that's something, but you got 4 or 5 multiple. You got multiple people, and you've got documents, and you've got it's just that's an unbeatable case.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know whether or not the government and him explored any settlement. I just don't think that the government was even offering him a plea deal at this point.
Yeah, I think I spoke with what was her name? Fong. Do you know him? Tiffany Fong. Tiffany Fong, do you remember? Did you ever see that one? I think she mentioned that either she said that they were offering him and he wouldn't accept it or accept whatever the plea was, or he was saying he wouldn't take a plea no matter what. So I forget what it was, but I want to say that they were willing to talk about it and he was unwilling to even discuss taking a plea.
I'm sure they were coming in with a 30-year sentence.
Yeah, which I'm sure just, no, absolutely not. I'm not going to, But anyway, so somebody asked me, because I have, guys that have my cell number and stuff, and they're, I got bombarded yesterday with all of the SBF just got 25 years. SBF guys are shooting me texts, everything, or links and everything to articles. And one guy, and I said, hey, and I was telling him, listen, man, I'm doing a video on it tomorrow. So one of the guys said, one of the things you have to discuss is, what do you think his frame of mind was when he walked in to be sentenced, knowing his lawyers are asking for 5 years? Like, what do you think his frame of mind was? Like, I thought that was a good question. Sorry. So I just wanted to remember it, because when I went into sentencing and, and I mean, I was, blatantly guilty and willing to admit I'm guilty. So, which didn't help me. But when I walked in, I really felt like my lawyer had me convinced that some of my enhancements, she was going to argue with the judge. She was going to get him to throw out some of my enhancements, and I was going to end up with about 12 to 13 years. She was like, look, I'm going to win this one, this one, this one. There's like 3 or 4 of them. And, and I read them, and talking with her, I agreed I didn't feel these applied. And I really felt like I was not going to get 26 and a half years. I was going to get 12 to 13 years. And, I didn't. She lost every one of them. And I got 26 years and 4 months. And it was so overwhelmingly devastating, because in my mind, I did not give myself, time or allow myself to even contemplate getting 26 years. So when I got it, it was surreal. Like, I all I could think of was this can't be happening. Like I didn't do anything to get 26. I no way do I deserve 26 years. Like and I was willing to say, hey, absolutely, I broke the law over and over and over again. Like I've been doing this for almost a decade. So I was more than willing to say, this guy is saying I didn't do anything wrong. So
well, that's a phenomenon that's common amongst fraud defendants.
Right.
Because they have no experience with the criminal justice system. And there's this notion that, look, there's no pro-criminal judges.
Right.
And even the judges that are fair will not hesitate to slam you.
Right.
And I don't think that a lot of the people who have no experience with the system understand that. And so for someone like him, he's got very high-priced attorneys. They probably persuaded him in your circumstance, same thing, you're going to get 6 years. Even if he says, you know what, let's double it, 12.
Yeah, he wasn't prepared for 25.
Yeah, he wasn't prepared for 25. Particularly also because he's got Asperger's. And so it's easier for a guy like that to get fixated on one or two aspects. And it causes them to, he's focusing on the trees and he misses the entire forest.
Right.
And I'm sure he didn't see that forest coming. particularly because he's in segregated housing. He has a police officer for a cellmate. And so it's not like he's mingling with other inmates who are saying, in your story, where you're hearing, yeah, I went in thinking I'm going to get 5 and you got 20.
Yeah.
And so that at least prepares you psychologically for something going devastatingly wrong. I think he was in a little bit of a bubble, and he's probably in the same circumstances you were.
So okay. I did a video where I talk about what I was, it was like, he's going to go to prison. I wasn't thinking about, the credits, the First Step Act credits or anything like that. And I was like, yeah, he's, whatever he gets, he's going to get to prison. It's going to take him. Well, this was also, I don't think he'd been arrested when I did this video. So he's been incarcerated, now he's been, at that point, I didn't think he had been, he wasn't incarcerated yet. So I remember thinking it's going to take like 6 months for his kind of expectations of life to kind of drop. You get there when you first get arrested, you can't reach for listen, for days, I reached for my cell phone. I would roll over or panic. I have that, have that momentary panic, like, where's my phone? Like, what? And I would be like, oh my God, constantly patting where's my pat my pants for, this was back when we had pockets. I go, where's my, oh my God, there's no cell phone. I mean, it was a constant thing that it took days before I started. It really even sunk in that, listen, there is no cell phone. There is no computer. Cause initially I was in the U.S. Marshals lockup. So there's no core links. There's no computers you can get to email anybody. So it took weeks and weeks before I could even fathom where I was and stopped. It took months before I stopped waking up in the morning, because you have that initial where you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh my God, I'm still in prison. Like you keep thinking there's a split second where you think maybe it's a dream, and you wake up, you're still dreaming about the street. It takes a few years to stop dreaming about the street. Then after about 3 or 4 years, and my cousin told me this, when I first got locked up, like my cousin was the medium, and I was telling him, man, I had the weirdest dream last night. And I was telling him about what was going on in the dream. And he goes, you still dreaming about the street? I was like, yeah. He goes, yeah. He said, you've been locked up, a couple of years? And I was like, yeah. And he said, yeah. He goes, it'd take another year or so. He said, you'll stop dreaming. He said, you'll probably stop dreaming about the street in a few more years. And I remember, it never even occurred to me that would happen. And so what happened was, after about 3 years or so, I started having dreams where I was still on the street, most of the people in the dream were people from prison. And then I got to the point where I was just it slowly meshed into me dreaming about prison. And some of the people were people from the street and in prison. And then it got to the point where I only dreamed about being in prison. After about 5 years, I only dreamed about being in prison and people that were in prison. I stopped dreaming about anybody else. So, and honestly, now I can barely ever remember my dreams, but there's so much of a shift when you get out of prison, as far as like the amount of input that's coming in. Like it's so much simpler of a life when you're locked up. So you have so many, there's just a lot less going on. So I was going to say, for him, he's been about a year. Once he gets to prison will be better than where he is.
Much better.
He'll get into a routine. And I would say, look, he'll get there in 6 months. He'll be teaching GED. He'll be teaching a cryptocurrency class, a trading course on how to trade crypto, which he clearly doesn't know how to do. He'll talk about setting up corporations. He will turn up to be kind of the cool geeky guy.
Yeah.
In prison.
No problems in prison.
Yeah, and then he'll get tons of visits because. Well,
don't forget, he's going to spend maybe a couple of years at the medium. Assuming he doesn't get a waiver now. Then he'll probably end up at Terminal Island. And Terminal Island's a super sweet spot. It's low, right on the water. And it's the kind of place where a guy like that can easily knock out a decade, and time goes by quickly.
Right.
There's no reason why he's not going to go to minimum security. And so, he'll end up, I don't know if they're going to let him teach a crypto class, only because it would really reflect poorly on the Bureau.
Right. They let me teach a real estate class.
Yeah, but you weren't his
level. I wasn't his level of.
His level of. You know what I mean? They'll have him, being a clerk in the education department.
Yeah. So listen, I don't know if I've ever told you this. When I first got locked up and I went to the medium, like one of the first things when I talked to my counselor, I was like, and she was like, God, you shouldn't even be here. She's like, you've got camp points, you know, or what do they call it?
Minimum security.
Yeah. Like
out custody.
You got out custody points. She's like, you should be at a camp. And I was like, well, when can I go to a camp? And she's like, she explained, it's going to be 10 years. And she was like, 10 years. She says, to be honest with you, you can put in a special request and try and get there at like 12 years left. She said, which I would do for you. But I won't be your counselor by the time you get there.
Case manager.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I won't be your case manager by the time you get there. She said, so yeah, whatever. She said 10 or 12 years. She said, you'll go to a camp. And so in my mind, immediately, I thought, and keep in mind, so I'm already looking at 22 to 23 years, right? So I got 22 years left. So I thought, okay, so if I can go at 10, then I was like 10 to 12. So I'm like, I basically have at worst case 12 years. 12 years, I'll go to a camp, I'll escape.
Yeah.
Like you know what I'm saying? In my mind, I was still thinking you're not doing all this time. It's even though as silly as it is, it's hope.
Yeah.
And I was meeting guys in the medium who had been to a camp and they had left. Like I knew a guy that, and I know you know a ton of these guys, right? Like that they went to a camp, they stayed there for 3 months or 6 months, convinced somebody to pick them up at the gate or pick them up outside the area, in a certain area, and they would go there, pick them up. I knew this one guy he was there maybe 6 months, got picked up by somebody, ex-wife, something. They caught him like 3 months later, 7 states away. Grabbed him, transported him back, didn't charge him with escape because there was no fence. Instead, they took like 50 days of good time away from him. And they sent him to a medium, which is where I met him. And then I knew another guy who had stayed in the camp for like, this is funny. He stayed there for almost a year because he was taking a course on graphic design and he wanted to finish the course. So he finished the course, then he escaped. He was gone for like 18 months. And where they caught him? They caught him like in Italy or Spain or something. So they caught him, transported him back, sent him to a medium, and he got like 35 days of good time taken away. They didn't charge him. And then he said, about 4 months later, they caught me stealing bread. He had like 4 pieces of bread. He was stealing, smuggling out of that chow hall. He said they took away 54 days or 50 days. He said they took away 15 more days for stealing 4 pieces of bread than the escape, catching me in another country. So I felt like, man, so 10 years, I'll do 10 years, and I'd already done like a year. So whatever, it's whatever, but who knows when I was going to get there. So 10 to 12 years, I'm going to do 10, 11, 12 years at the most, and I'll escape. And that helped me kind of get through it. Yeah. Like, I wonder what his, then you get to a point, you realize, listen, the BOP has it. They know what they're doing. Because after doing, I realized by the time I got to a point where it's like, I'll be at a camp in 5 years or 6 years or 8 years or whatever it is. And I remember thinking, I was at that point where it's like, would you escape? Where before it was 100%, absolutely, I'm going to escape. And then I was like, no, why would I escape? Like, I don't want to have to be chased my whole life and there would be a big deal. Like, they know not to, when they can send you to a camp and you'll do the time, you'll stay there. He won't go anywhere. Yeah. He's been locked up too long. He won't leave. He's conditioned to be here. He'll do. So we can send him at about 8 years. I remember the counselor, the case manager, Miss Jenkins. You remember? No. So when I talked to her, when I got to the low, she told me, I said, when can I go to a camp? She said, I'll probably send you to a camp. She said, if I'm still here. She said, probably about 6 years. 6 years. And I go, I was told that, 12 years you can put in a thing. She went, She said, you even then I wouldn't do it. She said 10 years. She said, but not you. She goes, you got rabbit in your blood. She goes, they caught you on the run. She goes, you'll run. She said, yeah, I'd send you about 6 years. And I thought, God, who told you? But so I'm wondering what's going through his head. He can't go anywhere. He can't be thinking he can go anywhere.
He's not thinking escape. He's still thinking he's winning his appeal.
I just can't imagine you would be that. He has to know how bad the court. No.
It's not until he's been in the system
and
he's seen hundreds of guys get relief under circumstances a lot more egregious, or
Right.
failure to get relief and just get shafted. And now that's where he'll be like, wow, I really made a mistake.
Right.
Although ultimately he got a big break because he ended up with a sentence less than what I'm sure the government was offering.
Yeah. Yeah, he could have done. I only know one or two guys that ever got less than what the plea deal was. Like went to trial and got less. I only know a few. One of them, I think Jacob Diaz was offered like 15 years and he ended up losing at trial and got 10.
Yeah.
So he was like, in the end, I got less than they were even offering. And then I knew another guy who went to trial and ended up getting sentenced to like, they were offering him like 6 or 7 years and he ended up getting like 4 after losing at trial. So usually they offer you 5, you go to trial, you get 15 or 20.
It's a very unusual circumstance.
Yeah, that's a lot, and hearing a lot of cases too.
He's already come out ahead.
Yeah, but he doesn't think so.
He doesn't think so at this point. And then once he gets to the low security institution, then at that point he'll have to bring 7 or 8 years before he gets to a minimum security. And once he's out custody, at that point, like I said, there's a very good chance he'll be able to get some kind of a home confinement placement. Simply because his crime is not consistent with a custodial sentence.
Right.
And so as long as his family still has the money to get him the attorneys, he'll be able to push that line. But I mean, he still has to be, he's got at least 14 years before he can start thinking along those lines.
How long would you think he will fight in court before he's exhausted his appeals and he no longer has anything in court? Do you think he'll get to that point?
Well, certainly. Let's say it takes...
Well, Donovan's still fighting.
Yes, but that's because Donovan had Amadeo.
Right. He says it like...
Amadeo will fight your sentence to the last day of your bid.
Right. So...
I mean...
That brings up a question from the audience.
Okay.
People say, do you think Amadeo would be able to help SBF if he was still locked up?
To the extent... if anybody could, it would be Frank. Look, there was a... what was the guy's name? He was in the unit. He was a Commodore.
Don't feed Frank's ego. It's
well, you
bad
know what
enough.
I mean? No. Like, this is... Okay, what was it? Martin Bradley.
Oh, yeah. I've talked to Bradley.
Okay. And so...
I tried to get him on the program.
Oh, did you?
He wouldn't do it.
Yeah. And so Bradley, we were in the same unit. And we would have these debates because like the government was offering him essentially a time served sentence.
Yeah.
And but at this point, he's like 10 years into a sentence and he was so agitated. He's like consumed with anger.
Yeah.
Like he missed his daughter's wedding. He missed, these life events. And I said, look, you don't understand. Even if you win tomorrow, you didn't win. All you're doing is getting out from underneath the rubble.
Yeah.
And it takes a shifting of people's mentality. Like when guys come to me, hey, can you help me with my case? Well, if you're trying to go from 25 to time served, I'm not the guy. If you want to go from 25 to 15, now we can talk.
Right.
And someone like SBF, he would have to appreciate the fact that, no, you're not going to be able to get out from underneath the conviction. Now, someone like Frank may be able to come up with a defense that the government missed or that the attorneys missed to the point where, although it probably wouldn't have proven to be ultimately successful, it's strong enough to where he'll obtain a series of evidentiary hearings where the government will say, you know what, we'll take the 25 down to 20.
Right. They'll give in to something just to stop this process.
That's, you know what I mean? And that's the magic of Frank, because with Martin Bradley, Frank took over Bradley's case. Bradley spent $5 million at trial. Had Roy Black.
Yeah.
Then he had $2 million on appeal attorneys. Lost his trial, lost his appeal. Spends $1 million on, I think it was like Garland Samuels or whatever it is, the law firm out of Atlanta. And he's $1 million into his 2255, his habeas action. The claim that won was the one Frank did.
Yeah.
This guy's $8 million into lawyers.
Cost him a six-pack of soda.
Just cost him a few cases of soda.
Right.
And that's the brilliance of Frank, where he's able to come up with claims that nobody else sees.
Was that the one where I remember his appeal was going in at the last minute, Frank came running out and said, hey, he has to put this one in.
Yes.
He has to put this one. And it was just one of like 15. It was just one of, but that's the one they won
That's
on.
the one they won.
And it was at the last minute.
Yeah.
Like he was like, put this one in. Yeah,
Now,
go ahead.
there's going to be very few people like that. And so a guy like SBF, he shows up at the prison.
He's not going to mean it. There's not going to be a Frank Amadeo there.
No. Now, if he was, majority of the guys are going to be like Riggs.
Yeah.
Now,
That's
you know,
horrible.
at the camp, you're going to have a number of attorneys because you have a lot of lawyers actually at the minimum security institutions. The problem is by the time he gets there, all his claims will be time barred.
Right.
And so he's essentially going to have to rely on the attorneys either on appeal or on 2255. Whereas with someone like Frank, he just brings such a tremendous institutional understanding. And that's why, to the extent anybody would have been in a position to help him, it would have been someone like Frank. You know, basically, there was a hedge fund guy out of New York, Raj Rajartnam, right? $11 billion fraud case or whatever the hell it was.
Julian Dory, my buddy in not New York, he's in New Jersey. He did a podcast with him.
Okay, yeah, he spent $40 million on his defense.
Jesus, $40 million.
Yeah. And his attorneys put together a mosaic defense that I thought, had that been put together for SBF, he may have been able to swing it. Unfortunately for Raj, you know, the co-conspirator was an attractive blonde that was sleeping with executives from the companies, and Raj is on the phone, play him like a fiddle, sweetheart. You know, so it's like hard to get around that kind of evidence.
Right.
But with SBF's, had he had someone with that kind of creativity, when Frank's high, you know, high on his cycle,
Right.
unstoppable.
Yeah. You know, we at the end of this video, we have to put the Frank Amadeo, you know, where you can click on it.
Mhm.
You have to.
I can see if I can get the transcript. There was a transcript from a judge, and I forgot what court it was in. And because, you know, Frank, of course, signs the pleadings on every case that he does.
Yeah. So think about it. So if I file a motion, let's say even if Frank prepares it, I still sign it. Like it's my motion, right? So I'm fighting my own motion. I write the whole thing up. But of course, when Frank's helping you, he's really preparing it. You're just signing that it's yours and you're putting it in. Frank would sign it. Frank Amadeo assisting, you know, boom. So there's tons of these motions out there. Some judges would get furious that Frank had signed it. Who is this inmate? They would throw him back, kick him back, and make him refile it, and all kinds of stuff. But it got to a point where they just started letting it, like, okay, everybody knew who he was, so they just started letting him sign them. I mean, it was total ego, by the way. There's no reason for him to sign that.
He's saying it's authored by.
Authored by.
Yeah.
There's no reason for him to say that, other than he wants them to know, I'm causing this problem for you.
And so, and then when that judge issued its order, he made a point of going on this little digression talking about Frank, because Frank had signed the pleadings.
For another inmate. So.
And the judge is going on about how every judge in the federal system throughout the entire country knows the high quality of work that Mr. Amadeo is doing on behalf of other inmates.
It's ridiculous.
You know, like Frank essentially had that like laminated up on the wall. And I mean, but that's why when you asked earlier if he had someone like him, yes. Only because he's able to operate without any time constraints. Because the one thing Frank was a master of was the extension of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it'll just come to him. And, you know, I just don't see SBF getting any relief on a conviction. He may get a little bit of a break on a sentence, but even then.
Well, like with Elizabeth Holmes, she got what? Was it like 14?
11 years or 14 years.
And then
like
they reduce it by like 2 years.
I'm not familiar with that. I haven't followed
Yeah. Like she literally got a couple of years knocked off immediately.
Yeah, good for
they
her.
filed this, they filed that, and they said, came back, they found some mistake, and they said, okay, we'll knock off a couple more years. So she went from like 14 to like 11.
Mm-hmm.
That was another one. Like to me, I was in such shock that she got such a low sentence. I would have told you 25 or 30 years, only because her crime, unlike SBF, who's always maintained I didn't really do anything wrong. I know you don't understand what was happening. He was always trying to spin it.
Mm-hmm.
she blatantly, and multiple people got on the stand and blatantly she committed a fraud. Like her whole thing was a fraud. She was, even if it was the whole, I'm faking it till I make it, like you're taking people's blood, you're having outside place, you're saying we did the analysis, but you're really sending it to other labs. Like there's a whole, she had, I think it was Biden when was it Biden that came to the facility, or was it, I think it was Biden that came to the facility and they did a whole song and dance with him where they're showing him the lab and they're like, nothing in the lab worked. Like it was all a dog and pony show. I mean, she's blatantly lying, saying that the military is already using this technology. I mean, there's so many things that she blatantly said to get more and more money. And it was just all a lie. So to me, I felt like her 20 to 30 years, somewhere in there. She got like roughly 14 and then immediately got like 3 off. So, but yeah, so you're thinking he's got what you said, 14, about 14 years?
14 years before he'll become eligible under the FSA to get transferred to home confinement. And no one's going to get a 7-year placement at a halfway house. And
assuming they don't remove the management variable, he's going to go to a medium. He'll be there for a couple of years and go to a low. And he'll be there for, well, whatever.
10.
Yeah, 10, and maybe do a year in a camp somewhere. So do you think that anybody will try and shake him down, like, make him pay extortion? You don't think anybody would even dare step to him like that?
No, they'll get shipped immediately to the East Coast.
Okay.
And not just him, the entire car.
Right.
It'll be like Mr. Mosen, where it's like literally the guys in your own little ethnic group, race group, whatever clique you're associated with, they're all going to be letting you know, hey man, don't fuck with that guy.
Right.
Because it's not just you getting shipped, it's the entire car getting shipped. And so if someone of that nature, he's not going to have very many problems. Now, of course, if it's a personal beef, if he screws somebody out of money or whatever, then that's different.
Yeah, that guy might just punch him in the face.
That's right. But if it's not going to be targeted activity.
I don't think he's going to have to screw. I mean, he's going to have plenty of money on his books. He's going to have.
Well, remember, he's got an enormous restitution.
Right. So he'll put money on other people's books. If he figures out this, the thing is how funny is that? Like, you think how easy it is. Like, hey, put $300 on this guy's books. Yeah. But the truth is, the types of people that he's associated with on the street, like he asks his mom, I need you to do this.
Yeah, they're not going to do it.
She's going to be like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
I'll put money on your books. Yeah, but they're hitting me for $150 in restitution and whatever. And I need this, I need that. No. I don't care. I'm not.
Yeah. Both his parents are attorneys, so they're not going to be putting money on another inmate's books.
Yeah, you're not getting me locked up. I'm not losing my license.
Yeah, her bar license.
Right.
Is there anything that he should be acting right, different, or?
No, I mean, look, when someone like that shows up, the Bureau is going to go out of the way to make sure he doesn't have any problems. For him, what he needs to do is obviously settle into a routine. Now, he needs to get an understanding on how he can try to assist his attorneys with developing claims. The appeal process, he's got no input in, because that's going to be determined by the record. But going forward, if he can get into a halfway decent legal class, or at least you understand what's going on. Because the last thing you want to do is go through the process, lose, and then 5 years later, oh man, I had a claim, but you just don't know it at the time. So at least if he can participate in it, he's going to have the peace of mind to know, hey, look, we brought the claims, we lost. Your case is over. I did 25 years in prison, 23 years from the date I was sentenced, and we fought the case to the very last day. Won 2 appeals, 3 resentencings. And if it wasn't for COVID, I'd have gone back for another series of evidentiary hearings. When I got to the halfway house, literally the motion got withdrawn. Like there's still 10 claims that were potentially legally viable. That, like at some point I was like, look, I want to move on with my life. I don't want to be traveling back and forth to the Bay Area to do any additional hearings. And so when he started talking about people, like how he started dreaming about prison, that never happened to me. I didn't spend a day in prison. I was on the streets the entire time.
You also had hope the whole time.
Hope is a strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, but you had the idea that you had something in court and you could win and get out.
Yes.
I got to a point where I was
that's why, so you actually transitioned into prison.
I realized I'm going to be here and I'm going to be here, and if I'm here, I need to basically, this is my life and I need to make a life here.
Yes.
And
that's the point where I'm saying he needs to get to.
Yeah.
So once he loses his appeal, once he loses his post-conviction action, then it's like, okay, well, you know what? He'll be at a low by then. And like you said in your earlier story, it's really not that bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
As long as you've got some good books.
Yeah.
Like, had he been in my old unit, you know, we had guys from NASA, we had guys from the CIA, we had NSA hackers. So it was a very different population than the guys in your unit.
Yeah. Yeah. My unit, they were dreads of the earth. But I was going to say, if my advice, you know, he's still thinking legally, I'm saying like my advice is, you know, to not have problems is you try and get to a 2-man cell as quick as possible. You join a softball team. You sign up for classes, as many classes as possible, because all that will keep you mentally occupied.
Yeah.
You get a job that you enjoy going to, like GED, something like that. Because first of all, going GED, even though you're dealing with guys that don't have their high school diploma, at least he'll feel like he's accomplishing something. Like when I worked with someone and they got their GED, like it was like, wow, like this guy can barely read. It was like we started 3 months ago. He could barely do anything. He just got his GED. It's silly, but it gives you these little incremental accomplishments. You know, it gives you a purpose, gives you something to get out of bed in the morning because you're so overwhelmingly depressed initially. And the other thing is, you know, which I don't think will be a problem for him, but you'd be shocked how many people have money that do run up bills. Like, don't borrow things from people. Don't talk about people. Don't gamble. You know what I'm saying? Like be respectful.
His type of personality, he's not going to have.
Right, but I'm just saying,
you know
in general,
you know, like,
well, he's super condescending.
No, but here's the thing: he's condescending with people that he perceives as being subordinate to him. That are beneath him.
I know what subordinate means.
Yeah, but they're.
Don't you think he's going to think that?
No, because there's somebody who'll just sock him in the face.
Right.
And so now he's in an environment where he's not barking out commands to his girlfriend or
his employees.
Or the employees.
Or his lawyers.
Now he's in a circumstance where he has to just, you know, mind his own business. And he's naturally reclusive anyway.
So you only have to get punched like one time to realize this is not, I need to alter this behavior.
You know, like when, you know, I started off at a maximum security prison, I was the smallest guy on the yard. I had no problems. Just mind your own business and, you know,
that's what I'm
stay
saying.
focused. So for someone like himself, he doesn't have the kind of personality where he's going to be in the middle of other people's drama. He's the kind of guy that's going to be just like, man, I don't want to keep people at arm's length. Now he's going to end up falling into his little group where, you know, they're playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Or there may be like a little bit of a science group. Like, it depends on what prison he goes to.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if he ends up at a prison like we had at our place where it was just NSA hackers left and right.
Right.
CIA hackers or something like that. Now all of a sudden
he's got people of his own ilk that he can have conversations with.
Right.
You know.
He can start building business plans. He can start taking ideas from other individuals. You know, and quite frankly, you know, we had a number of guys at the prison that we were just at that were legitimately outstanding traders.
Right. Yeah.
You know, you had the guy that was in you were in B4, so this guy was in B3, Mr. McGinn. You know, Goldman Sachs, a guy, big time banker, you know, managing a $500 million fund. Well, their classes are actually impactful.
Right.
So if you spend 2 years in Mr. McGinn's class, all of a sudden now you're actually able to come out and start trading.
Right. I was going to say, also there was, what was the name of it? Lance? Do you remember Lance?
Lance Paulson?
Lance Paulson.
Yeah, we had four billionaires on the compound.
A billionaire.
We had 4 of them on that compound. And so...
And Lance went to trial, and they sent Lance to the pen. So, you know, sometimes they get angry with you for going to trial, or for whatever reason, he got sent to a pen. Wasn't there very long, but he was there long enough to get smashed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody punched him, knocked out his tooth. Remember, he was missing a tooth. Well, poor Lance, old man. He was just an old. He wasn't that grumpy. He wasn't bad. I mean, I wouldn't invest with him, but what else? I think
I got another one. This is the last question from the list. You already touched about it legally, but how would you have fought his case differently, maybe personally? Like how he acted differently, or
oh God,
what would you do? What would you do differently? You already talked about the case, like
well, look. Sometimes guys that are very intelligent can do very dumb things,
right?
And in that circumstance, he was overly convinced in his ability to persuade. And so he ended up locking himself into positions that later on he couldn't get out from underneath.
Yeah.
So he'd have been better off just doing what the attorneys will always tell you. It's like, look, you know what? Don't speak with the media.
Right. Well, you said it in much different. What I said was his problem. I've said this exact same thing pretty much, where I said, his problem is that he's one of those guys that thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, and he felt like, I'm going to go out there and I'm so smart. I'm going to be able to spin this in such a way that I'm going to convince people that it's not what they think and I wasn't involved and it was really just a series of some bad decisions and it wasn't criminal. And the truth is, when you've got smart people there asking the right questions and you can't bamboozle them, then it just goes fucking wrong. So he should have just not spoken. He first of all, he should have been the first person in the door. When it was going under, when everything was starting to go under, he should have been the first person in the door saying, look, I fucked up. Here's what I did. Here's what happened. I can help you with the case. Let's cut a deal, something. Yeah. Instead of what he did instead was, I haven't done anything wrong. Everybody's lying. This is what you think. Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yeah. Once they realized that he was essentially using FTX's money to bankroll Alameda's trading, the jig was up.
What? Yeah, and then when his girlfriend, everybody walked in, that just sealed the deal.
Yeah, that's just bolstering the government's case.
Yeah.
But, the dipping into the investor funds, just self-dealing.
Yeah.
It's the Capital Blue Boat.
Yeah, it's all.
It's all the $30 million penthouse. And, at some point, you have to understand that federal prosecutors are very good at what they do. And they have unlimited resources. And when the FBI gets involved and they bring in other forensic experts, then at that point, you've got to create a different scenario. And there's just no spinning his way out of that.
Hey, so this was my buddy Pete, and Pete recently got released from prison, and Pete and Amadeo helped me with all my legal work. So that's why he's here and why we went over the FTX sentencing. So I really appreciate you guys watching. Do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you get notified of videos like this. Please consider joining my Patreon and leave me a comment in the comment section and share the video because it really does help. If you've been listening, we referred to a guy named Frank Amadeo. So we're going to go ahead and put the link up here and you can watch Frank Amadeo's full story. And it's a super interesting case, super interesting, very long video, but a great video to watch. So check it out. And I appreciate you guys watching.